one of the greatest commanders in all of history. The Emperor of the French was not himself native born to France. As with Alexander the Great, who came not from Greece but from Macedon, and later Hitler, who came not from Germany but from Austria, and Stalin, who came from the Slavic state of Georgia rather than Russia. Napoleon came from the island of Corsica and spoke Italian and Corsican as his first languages, not French. In fact, in his entire life, he could not write French correctly, although he could speak it. Napoleon's family was of Italian nobility. Although later depictions have him as a short person, he was actually average in size and height. He was also one of the most complex personalities in history. Born the second son and fourth child of this noble family, and going by the name Napoleone Bonaparte in that way, he had a very influential mother, another trait shared by the aforementioned significant leaders. He did not learn to speak French until he was 10. He was something of an outcast in school. He was bullied by his peers at his military school for his accent, his birthplace, his supposedly short stature, although he was not that short, his mannerisms, and his inability to speak French quickly. They mocked him, calling him paille au nez, straw up his nose. But Napoleon always fought back. He hated to lose. He developed a technique for cheating at cards. He had an iron trap for a memory and never forgot a face. He was also incredibly generous with his money. He was also not afraid to kill and was well known for his severity, executing hundreds of Parisians when the French Republic called on him to do so, and he never thought twice about sending thousands of young men to die. He countered this by being the best in the business, especially in artillery, and the French took special pride in developing artillery. His soldiers adored him. They called him their little corporal. And the reason they adored him because he won, and he took care of them despite his desire to put them into battle. And it was with this army he would begin to dominate and then rule almost all of Europe for more than a decade, eventually becoming Emperor of France. However, despite Napoleon's own personal conservatism, his armies became the chief carrying agent of the revolution, and they infected the rest of Europe and the world with the fire of revolution. This is a map of Paris at the time that the revolution moved into its Napoleonic phase. The walls of the city today are now avenues and streets, but you can see where the Bastille, the temple where Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette were kept prior to their execution, Notre Dame Cathedral, and the Place de la Concorde were in relation to each other. You also see in the lower left-hand corner the École Militaire, that is the French military school that Napoleon himself would have attended. Even before the Corsican general began his rise to power, the revolutionary armies were beginning to infect the rest of Europe. We shall examine the growing civil war in France, the fall of Robespierre, and then the rise of the Directory as it sought to manage the war abroad. One of the reasons for the civil war in France is that the Jacobin movement was largely an urban movement, and it tended to reflect the interests of Paris and the larger towns and cities in France, leaving the countryside and the peasantry on the periphery. This created an increased tension between the town and the countryside, which always looked at each other with suspicion and ambivalence. The peasants resented the higher taxes, which, after all, is what caused the revolution in the first place. Revolutionary troops now trying to enforce order go around the countryside, and between 20,000 to 250,000, mostly peasants, may have been slaughtered by revolutionary troops. Here's an interesting example of how radical the revolution had become. Charlotte Corday was a revolutionary woman who assassinated Jean-Paul Marat while he was taking a bath in his bathtub. She stabbed him to death in the bathtub. She was then led away, tried quickly, and executed as a counter-revolutionary, showing that women are becoming radicalized during this period of unrest in France. Charlotte Corday assassinated Marat because he was one of the many who helped Robespierre send numerous people to the guillotine. She may have thought that this would have eased the terror, but actually more and more people were getting their heads cut off, despite the fact that the emergency was easing on France. Well, finally, the Parisians and the Jacobins had had enough of Maximilien Robespierre. The Thermidorian reaction, that is, the Revolution of July, ousted Robespierre, and eventually the crowds executed him. When the military came for him in his office, Robespierre tried to shoot himself, but the gun misfired and only succeeded in dislocating his jaw from his skull and knocking him out. They broke into his office, found Robespierre with blood all over his face, revived him, put his jaw in a sling, then took him outside and guillotined him. With the execution of Robespierre, the terror collapsed, and the leading Jacobins in the mountain were then purged from the assembly, and this led to a new government in France. It was led by a 5-member executive team called the Directoire, or the Directory, which would govern France for 4 years before another coup initiated what was called the Consulate, and Napoleon would be the first consul. The Directory now takes on the responsibility of fighting the coalitions against it. It essentially took over the role of the Committee for Public Safety. The Directory actually had some success with the armies afield. The armies created new revolutionary republics in Italy, Switzerland, and the Netherlands, and Napoleon then decided that he was going to go embark on his Egyptian expedition. As the armies began to win more and more battles and take territories, they were sending a great deal of art and treasure back to Paris from these countries, and this helped create a new museum in the Louvre. At home, the Directory, though, was very corrupt and inefficient. One of its members, Paul-François Jean-Nicolas, Vicomte de Barras, was described as a man without faith and without morals, in politics without character and without resolution. He has all the tastes of an opulent prince, generous, magnificent, and dissipated. One must keep in mind that the army in France, especially its officer corps, leaned heavily toward the monarchy at first and disapproved of the regicide. However, over time, the French army became more revolutionary as the enlisted men sided with the revolution, and officers like Napoleon also approved of its early reforms. As the army won more and more battle on the French frontiers against the Austrians, Prussians, the other German states, the morale of the soldiers improved, as it was led by young generals promoted based on achievement rather than on connections or birth, and Napoleon was one of those. Having successfully defended France from invasion, the Revolutionary Army now went on to the offensive in the summer of 1794 with what was known as the War of Liberation. They went into the Austrian Netherlands, which is Belgium today, Mainz, which is in southwestern Germany, Savoy, which is on the border of southeastern France and northwestern Italy, and Nice, which is on the Mediterranean. The French now began to expand to what the revolutionary government termed its natural frontiers, which meant the Rhine and the Alps. Now, this meant either expanding France itself or creating sister republics. For instance, the Batavian Republic in the Netherlands put an end to the old Dutch Republic, which had declined precipitously since the days of Rembrandt. They established the Cisalpine Republic in northern Italy. Cisalpine means the near side of the Alps. This one was organized by Napoleon himself. The Helvetic Republic dissolved the old Swiss Confederation and the sovereignty of its cantons. but it excluded Geneva and assumed that into France. The Helvetic Republic was named for the tribes that lived in the Alps in Roman times, and when they had migrated out of the Alps, Julius Caesar had to go to war against them and send them back home to their valleys. Napoleon would later reinstate the sovereignty of the Swiss cantons because the Swiss Confederation was one of the oldest and most stable of governments. Finally, there was the Roman Republic. This was created from the territory of the Papal States, and the Pope, Pius VI, was exiled to France, and there he died in France. Naples finally restored the Papal States and put the next Pope after him, Pius VII, back in Rome. This map shows the results of the French Wars of Liberation as France pushed outward to its natural frontiers or its natural boundaries. Please focus on the Batavian Republic in the Netherlands and the Helvetic Republic in Switzerland, as well as the Roman Republic in Italy. Remember that these revolutionary armies are spreading the ideals of the revolution where they go. They are a carrying agent to this virus of revolutionary activity, the idea of basic human rights, the idea of universal male suffrage, the idea of equal taxation, the idea that monarchies are evil and must be destroyed. And this will make many of the crowned heads of Europe shudder as a result of this. Meanwhile, in Poland, on the other side of Europe, the Prussians, the Austrians, and the Russians concluded dissolving the once great Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. Both the Russian Tsarina, Catherine the Great, and the Prussian King, Frederick William, moved very quickly to keep revolutionary ideals and uprisings down. The final partition of Poland meant that this country, Poland, would not be an independent state again for another 123 years. It would take the Treaty of Versailles to give Poland its sovereignty back. Polish culture, the Polish language, was suppressed and nearly extinguished, except in some pockets of where Poland had been. This map shows the extent of France and her sister republics by the end of the 18th century. You see Austria, you see Prussia, you see Russia, you see French and their sister republics, as well as Britain. And so, like a virus, the revolution spread. The German Rhineland, which is the area of Germany on the west bank of the Rhine River that borders along the Netherlands, Belgium, and France, was at first sympathetic to the revolution. But Germany States. The French Revolution had a tremendous effect. The Federalist Party, under the leadership of Alexander Hamilton, was very pro-British and anti-revolution. They found that the revolution in France was too radical. The Federalists are the ones that, of course, wrote the Constitution of the United States, which is intended and was intended to kind of scale back the radicalism of the revolution that had begun under the Declaration of Independence. The Democratic Republican Party, which later becomes the basis for the Democratic Party, was generally pro-revolution. It was led by Thomas Jefferson, who very much approved of the revolution in France. The revolution touches Sweden, as King Gustavus III was assassinated by a nobleman. He said that the king violated his oath. So you're seeing another regicide taking place. Now, over in jolly old Britain, the revolution certainly had its adherents, but it definitely did not engulf England and cause George III to lose his head or anything like that. The London Corresponding Society debated, was sort of an academic club for debating the ideals of the revolution. But if any society in Britain got a little too revolutionary, the government very quickly went after them. Russia decided to battle Jacobinism in Poland. This is one of the reasons for the second and third partitions of Poland, because of what they believed to be revolutionary activity. The Poles wanted a nation of their own. They wanted to restore their old republic. Russia, not exactly a republican place. In the Western Hemisphere, along with the United States, you had the Caribbean colonies. In Saint-Domingue, which is Haiti, a large-scale revolt broke out in August of 1791. And so the National Convention extended civil and political rights to those of African descent in Saint-Domingue. Because of this, white planters signed an alliance with Britain. In 1793, the French commissioner in Saint-Domingue freed all slaves in his jurisdiction. The Revolution, the rights of man, freeing slaves. In February of 1794, the National Convention formally abolished slavery, extended full rights to all black men in the colony. It's because of the revolution that eventually you're going to have the country of Haiti. The other 2/3 of the island on which Saint-Domingue existed was Santo Domingo. And Spain offered freedom to any black slave who would serve in their army, so as to say, listen, we're not going to free you unless you serve in the army.
Minisa sacagüelo, oh, torne, minisa sacagüelo, canota moi javire, minisa sacagüelo, oh,
By 1800, whites who did not want to give up their slaves decided to flee the island. Many of them went to New Orleans, where they created an infusion of Creole French and also Afro-Creole French. This is a big boost to the Louisiana colony. But the economy was in ruin. Under the leadership of François-Domingue Toussaint Louverture, the African-Haitian governor of Saint-Domingue, Haiti now grows toward its independence. But former slaves were still bound to the land like serfs. And the thing got so out of hand that in 1802, French troops regained control of the island and arrested Toussaint. Toussaint would die in prison, but he became a symbol of the black struggle for freedom in the Americas. And eventually, his legacy would be the creation of the Republic of Haiti in 1804, which has been a very troubled republic, but it is still one of the truly African American countries in the Western Hemisphere. Here you see another depiction of Toussaint Louverture. And if you'll notice, he looks rather Napoleonic there, doesn't he? This is one of the reasons why we don't really call the French Revolution the French Revolution. We call it simply the Revolution, because it affected other countries. It affected colonies. Many of these former colonies of Spain begin to revolt. You see the colony of Saint-Domingue of France revolts and creates Haiti in the Caribbean. Why is this important? It's important for a number of reasons, but the most important of these is that the United States seizes upon this as a key foreign policy foundation. In 1823, the United States issues what is known as the Monroe Doctrine, in which it tells the nations of Europe to stay the hell out of the Western Hemisphere. If a nation is in revolt, you don't suppress the revolt. You don't interfere. The United States will handle the affairs in the Western Hemisphere. That doesn't come about except for the French revolutionary spirit that has infected these colonies. Now you say to yourself, well, aren't most of these colonies properties of Spain and Portugal? Well, guess what? Spain and Portugal are going to be very soon under the thumb of Napoleon. And he will be spreading the revolutionary spirit there, and it by nature will make its way to the colonies. And of course, the revolution certainly goes to dear old Ireland. In 1798, the Éire Amach, the Irish Rebellion, was initiated not by Catholics, but by Presbyterian radicals, Protestant radicals, who were angry at the Anglican establishment that was in Dublin. They were eventually joined by Catholics. Now, one of the Protestant radicals was a fellow by the name of Theobald Wolfe Tone. He was an Irishman who descended from a French Protestant family. Remember how the French Huguenots had to leave France for a time. Some of them went to Ireland. Wolfe Tone wanted a total break from Britain, and he wanted total freedom for Catholics in Ireland. He had had several meetings with Napoleon in France and wanted French help. Napoleon essentially flipped a coin and decided that Egypt, instead of Ireland, would get his army. Wolfe Tone was part of the Society of United Irishmen who wanted the break from Britain. A French expeditionary force landed, but it was defeated by a British army under the command of Lord Charles Cornwallis, the same British general who had surrendered to George Washington back in 1781. This rebellion was suppressed violently, and the Irish Parliament dissolved. Wolfe Tone was put into prison, and eventually he was hung as a traitor. The aftermath of this was simply that the British Parliament dissolved the Irish Parliament and created the Act of Union in 1800 that joined Ireland completely to Great Britain. And so it became the Kingdom of Great Britain, and the Kingdom of Ireland became the Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland together. And this is the beginning, though, with Wolfe Tone, of the Irish independent movement. The Society of United Irishmen will eventually become the forerunners of the Irish Republican Army, the Irish Volunteers, and so forth. And now, I hope you enjoy the music from the Irish group known as the Wolfe Tones. They are named partly in honor of Theobald Wolfe Tone, and also in part from the sound a violin can make if its string is not quite right.
High upon the gallows tree swung the noble-hearted three, by the vengeful tyrants stricken in their doom. But they met him face to face with the courage of their race, and they went with swords undaunted to their doom. God save Ireland, said the heroes. God save Ireland.